This is Eden of Light Cycle Astrology, and today I want to talk about the astrology that is coming through for us in the week ahead between February the 26th and March the 3rd. This is Mantic Monday, episode number 25. So this week we are wrapping up some of the big transits that we saw come through last week. We had a Mars-Venus conjunction that was in square to Jupiter. We had a full moon come through in the sign of Virgo as Mercury moved into Pisces, greatly debilitated. So there were some big astrology moments last week, and we're still kind of in the mix of some of those energies as we begin this week. But this week is also a very, very powerful week from the standpoint of what is happening in the sky above our heads. We have a triple conjunction involving the Sun, Mercury, and Saturn that is in a sextile with Jupiter, which is important because this triple conjunction is happening in Jupiter's sign of Pisces. So we have some peripheral aspects that are coming through as well. Now, normally I wouldn't even call these peripheral, but my aim on the channel is always to try to figure out what is going to be the order of transits or aspects that form in the sky that are most potent or more potent than the other ones. Not that the other ones aren't important, but especially from the standpoint of mundane astrology, where we're hoping to gain some kind of insight or prediction into the archetypal forms of energy that might be coalescing around us, on a global level. That's pretty hard to do because generally we want to take a look at the birth chart and see what transits are aspecting natal placements in the birth chart. But when we are doing things on a global level and trying to say something about that, with the archetypal forms that may be shaping during the week that maybe we all might collectively feel, it's usually good practice to just try to figure out what is going to be what's the hierarchy of aspects in terms of potency or power or something that will really stand out. So from that standpoint, this triple conjunction for me makes the top of the list this week. But we also have Mars perfecting a square to Jupiter as we enter the week. And then we also have on Friday, we have Venus beginning to engage a square to Uranus that perfects on Sunday. And then on Sunday, we have the Sun-Saturn conjunction beginning to fade away by that point, moving outside of that 3-degree range of engagement. So that's what we're going to take a look at today. We'll pull up the real-time clock here in a moment. Before we do, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit notifications so you don't miss any videos. Drop some comments in the comment section. I love to hear how you guys are experiencing the astrology out there. And you can always go to lightcycleastrology.com if you want to get a reading from me. You can check out my website there. And we talk a little bit about how we work with clients and the types of techniques that we use and so on and so forth. And obviously pricing and scheduling and all of that. So check that out if you're interested in some more personal astrological guidance from yours truly. Okay, well, let's jump into the real-time clock here, and we'll just go through the timing of the astrology of the week. So I have the clock set to London time, so it's central for everybody. And so you can see here we have Venus and Mars in Aquarius. We have Mars almost at 11 degrees and Venus at 13 degrees and change. So they're still pretty close together. They're going to track together for a while because these two planets move at almost the same speed. Of course, Venus is a faster moving planet than Mars, but when they're close like this, it takes them a while to sort of move out of each other's range. So that's going to track for a while, but you can see both of these planets have now gained some distance from Pluto. As both Venus and Mars entered Aquarius, they had to go over the passage of Pluto. That was something that happened a couple weeks back. So we're still seeing kind of the remnants of some of the astrology that, isn't just going to go, okay, it's a new week, let's just move on to another thing. These things are blending into new things that are coming along. But we're still, as the week opens here, we're still pretty much in that Venus Mars conjunction energy that is still having a little bit of that Plutonian kind of signature to it, but that's fading more and more. Now, uh, both of these planets are still co-present in the same sign with Pluto, so there's that to consider as well. And then we also have a lot of planets in Pisces. We have Mercury now in the sign of, however you want to call it. You can call it detriment, you can call it contrariety or exile, but whichever way you decide to describe this dignity or lack thereof that Mercury has when it is in the sign of Pisces, opposite to one of its temples of Virgo. It's whatever word you use. Mercury in Pisces is a little bit like an outsider. He's kind of like the person that doesn't fit in with the group or something like that. Um, Depending on what you or how you think of that, it's from the standpoint of Mercury's nature, in other words. So the intellectual communicator, the rational mind, the one that is going to put logic ahead of feelings and emotions. Mercury tends to have a little bit less of a natural way of expressing himself in this sign. Not that it's a bad placement for Mercury, like quote unquote bad, but it's just it goes against the grain of Mercury's nature, so to speak. But this will begin to improve because not only is Mercury kind of in this opposite place to his own temple, but by ancient astrologer standards, Mercury was said to also be in fall or depression. So Mercury has this double whammy of being in contrariety or detriment and in depression here. And then on top of that, this is what we went into last week too. The sun is very near to Mercury, or Mercury rather to the sun, and they're only about they're less than 1 degree apart as we roll into the beginning of the week here. So this is Mercury really burned up by the sun. The sun's heat is scorching Mercury. And so metaphorically or symbolically, that's how we describe Mercury going through kind of a dying phase. Now, once Mercury passes over the sun and comes out the other side, that's indicative or symbolic of Mercury's rebirth and recovery away from the that really hot condition that Mercury finds itself in. So Mercury banged up right now for sure, but on the way towards recovery. But what makes this week so extraordinary is that we have Saturn also going through the same process that Mercury is going through. So both Mercury and Saturn are going through this process of death and rebirth. And of course, the death and rebirth motif is going to center around the nature or significations of each of the planets. So for Mercury, it might be something that has to do with the rational mind, or it might have to do with communication and how well or dysfunctional that's occurring, It might have to do with movement or finances or money or anything that Mercury tends to represent. Saturn, likewise, is also going through this death and rebirth process, but the sun in this conjunction scenario is the one that is moving faster and moves over Saturn, the slower moving planet in the exchange. And that is when we see the rebirth occur. Again, for Saturn, it's going to be the death and rebirth motif, but it's going to center around Saturn's archetypal significations, right? So we get things that have to do with aging, things that have to do with something that is becoming mature, something that is becoming something that has to do with our duties, our obligations, our responsibilities, something that has to do with deep contemplative ideas or understandings and wisdoms of things, especially when we include down here in the sign of Taurus, we have Jupiter at almost 11 degrees here. And look at that. That is within range. So there are very interesting motifs that are coming in with Mercury, the Sun, and Saturn. And both or all three of these planets are applying to sextile Jupiter. And this, like I said in the beginning of the video, is really important because all of these planets are guests in Jupiter's temple of Pisces. So when we have Jupiter, the domicile lord or host of visitors in one of his temples, having a direct line of sight aspect to a conjunction that forms in his sign, that is really profound. That's a very clear sign that says this isn't broad. What is happening between the Sun, Mercury, and Saturn coming together all at the same moment in Pisces is more specific. There's something that is more detailed or specific. It's not just broadness that can be described as, oh, this is like how I feel. Of course, it can be on that level. That's part of it. But this makes me think, because there is this actual aspect between the host lord of this triple conjunction, it makes me think that it's more there. It may be tied in with a more specific event or a more potent or poignant thing that is really punctuated. So whether that's an idea or an external event that seems to mirror the astrology of the moment, or both, it could happen on the inner landscapes, or it could be something that is a matter of fate. That we then have to practice using free will to navigate. All this saying that I think that the degree-based sextile aspect from the host lord to guest planets making triple conjunction aspects in the sign of Pisces is speaking or is assigned to something more pointed. It's more specific, I think. So that's really interesting. And then, of course, we have Neptune in the mix too. So now I got off a little bit about the timing, going into just some of the significations of some of these things. But let's stick to timing just for a second. So on Tuesday, we see that Mars is perfecting a square to Jupiter. That energy began at the end of last week and really built over the weekend. And normally this would be a really interesting aspect to talk about, but I don't want to make this video too much about the other aspects that are going on, because this triple conjunction is plenty to talk about and wrap your mind around. But be that as it may, on Tuesday we have the perfection between Mars and Jupiter by square. So that is definitely a potent energy that comes through in the week, And when you get Mars square Jupiter, just briefly talking, you can get things like heroic effort or, big actions, do something really big that has this Herculean strength to it, or extreme motivation. One of the things that you can also feel with Mars square Jupiter is feeling justified in what you're doing, or if you react to something, if there's a reaction, especially if it involves any kind of aggressiveness or anger. There is a tendency with Mars square Jupiter on the shadow side to be like, well, it's perfectly fine that I got mad at that. Of course I'm going to get mad at that. And it has that real justification around it. But it can also be just really doing something big in a big way, taking a bold, decisive move, striking out on your own because you believe in yourself. All of those kind of heroic kind of themes can come in with Mars square Jupiter. That begins to reach its peak on Tuesday and then perfects and then begins to fade away as the week goes on. So that's also in the mix of this other astrology. There's just a lot of astrology this week, you guys. But if we go forward to Wednesday, we see that this is when the main event or the headline of the week happens. You can see, let me just roll the clock back by hours here. So the sequence of how this happens is that sometime around 9-ish a.m. in the morning, London time, Mercury will make that exact cazimi conjunction to the sun and then pass over the sun. And then about 6 hours after that, Mercury catches up with Saturn and then will pass over Saturn. And then about 6 hours after that, the sun will catch up to Saturn and pass over Saturn. So we have this amazing day right in the middle of the week where we have all of these resets. So these are not only, what we would consider to be conjunctions or adherences or bodily unions, depending on what you want to call it. But we also have to remember that these are synodic resets. Mercury, we get 3 to 4 Mercury-Sun conjunctions per year. So that is more of a frequent thing. But the Sun-Saturn synodic reset is something that we experience one time a year. And so, it's just striking that the annual Saturn synodic reset is occurring precisely as there is a Mercury cazimi. So that's just really amazing, for one. And then if we go forward to, let's go to Friday now, we get Venus beginning to move into a square with Uranus, about 3 degrees away from a perfected square to Uranus. Now, this square perfects on Sunday, and we also have Sunday the 3rd. We also have the sun beginning to move away from Saturn by this point and sort of gaining, it's still pretty close, but it's starting to, that energy, that intense Sun-Saturn energy is beginning to sort of fade away by this point. So that is the week, you guys. Now let's get into some of the symbolism and meaning behind the astrology this week. I chose 2 ways of looking at the astrology this week. So the first way, or the first form that I think that the astrology might represent or be symbolic of, is going to be this theme around aging. We usually correspond Saturn with age or maturity, responsibility, sort of getting older, physical old age, things like that. But when we have a Sun-Saturn conjunction that happens one time a year, where Saturn is going through this sort of death and rebirth and a reset of its synodic cycle, for me, this always reminds me of the rings inside the tree. So if you've ever seen that tree stump pattern where there's they say you can count how old the tree is by the rings. Every year it makes one more ring on the outside of the I guess the tree gets bigger by one ring. And so when you're looking at the stump, you can see, it started out this little, but it gets bigger every year, right? But it's fascinating to me that Saturn is connected with aging or getting older, and that planet physically has, the rings of Saturn around it. So for me, this connects my mind to that image of the tree and the aging, especially because we're talking about an annual synodic reset with Saturn, and trees have those annual rings that they make. So for me, there is every year when we get to the Sun-Saturn synodic reset, I get that image of that tree with the, okay, we've gotten one more year older kind of motif, right? And so I noticed that this time each year, if you're younger, you may not notice this, but for me, being in my 40s now, I noticed that this might be the time of year where I get a new creak in my body, or my teeth get a little bit more sensitive, or there's a pain that shows up in my elbow that I never had before. And what's weird is that I often notice that it seems like these things come out of nowhere. You go to bed and you're the way you are, you wake up and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, I have this new, there's this new pain somewhere in my body. I have no idea how it got there. I don't remember whacking it or anything like that. But there's just this like, oh, I've just gotten, oh my gosh, I have more white than I did, or whatever it is. So if you are older than you're being in your 30s, you will relate to this. I think that for me, it's always around this time of the year. I feel like I begin to notice new pains, uh, just new signs of wear and tear on my physical body. And I think that has to do with the sun being a planet that symbolizes vitality and life, right? And then Saturn, of course, representing things that are old or aging or maturing. So that's one motif, but I think it goes deeper than that. Um, there is also, interestingly, we have the rings that we wear if we're married. And you've heard the expression, now this is a derogatory expression, the old ball and chain that husbands refer to wives around, which is, of course, is not a nice thing to say. So, but I'm bringing up that saying because you get that notion around marriage and people that are married wearing the rings, right? And interesting that the rings, again, corresponding to being together with somebody in a commitment. And we know that Saturn is associated with responsibilities, duties, commitments, hard work. It's not easy to be married. So if you're married or even just in a long-term relationship, you know that it takes a lot of work, and that corresponds to Saturn's symbolism as well there. So there is, or there could be themes around a new cycle that is beginning around duty, responsibility, especially as it pertains to, maybe marriage or things like that, because this is happening in the sign of Pisces, right? And Pisces is Jupiter ruled and the exaltation of Venus. So there could be relational things that are corresponding or having to do with how things are unified. Jupiter is a planet that represents cohesion, unification, things that are held together by systems of law or religion or faith or trust or commitment or wisdom. You get things like the justice system when you think of Jupiter, but also religion and morality. All of these things that Jupiter is kind of circumambulating, all of these symbolic motifs around Jupiter things are about cohesiveness. What holds society together is the laws. What holds us together, that keeps us out of being, just a dog eat dog, law of the jungle kind of chaotic world, is the fact that there's some sense of morality or ethics that we try our best to adhere to. Whether we succeed or not is another story, but at least we try, right? We try to be moral. We try to be ethical and things like that. We try to treat other people according to our own principles or codes. These are all Jupiter related things. So this conjunction happening in a Jupiter ruled sign may speak to both how things are held together, how things are unified, like seeing into the nature of how things are held together, being able to have that past experience or wisdom that is coming to fruition or is maturing to a place that is ripe. And then you have the sun coming in there, which is a planet of Gnosis, right? So you do get this theme around things that may have to do with the physical mortality and becoming aware of things that are aging. But you also may encapsulate things like the aging cycle of a relationship or of a job, something that has great responsibility or duty, something that you're committed to, right? That has that ring attached to it. That's, broadly speaking, some of the themes I think that may be surrounding this triple conjunction is under the heading of like aging in the rings of Saturn. So one thing that might come up though is Saturn is also a planet of rejection. So if we were just having a Mercury Sun conjunction cazimi, in Jupiter sign receiving a sextile aspect from Jupiter, we might just talk about, okay, we're getting into some higher ethical or moral or principle understanding of something. There's some wisdom coming in. But this may have to do with Saturn understanding something that has gotten past its point of usefulness, right? Saturn represents things that are older or maybe breaking down or, aging somehow, becoming perhaps debilitated. There may be something in the mix that we are understanding that may need to be discarded or rejected. Saturn tends to reject things. So it is all of this coming down to something that we have to let go of, something that is aged like a car where you just all of a sudden you just know, you're like, man, I just can't get any more life out of this car. I just have to get a new car. And then you go out and you get rid of the old car, you get a new car, and that's how you see the motif of the order being perpetuated. Something, your life has maintained some order and functionality, because now you have a new car, but you had to get rid of something. So there may be something in the mix that's like, this has reached its expiration. It's no longer useful. It's too old. It needs to be discarded, or there may be something I need to reject about something over here. And it is all for the purpose of, let's say, keeping some kind of order within our lives, right? Where do we find union? Where do we find salvation? And where do we find resurrection? Are we simply taking the car to the mechanic and saying, I really love this car, but I need to maintain order in my life, obviously, to, get around and have transportation that's reliable. I'm not just going to throw it away. I'm going to save it. I'm going to resurrect it. I'm going to dump some money into this thing and, fix whatever I got to fix and get another 5 years out of it or something like that. So these are all motifs that are bringing in the sign of Pisces with salvation and resurrection, but also the symbolism of the cazimi with Mercury and Saturn to the sun, again, going through death and rebirth, that whole dying and resurrecting. So we get these really intricate overlaps of symbolism here with death and rebirth, things that are rejected or saved, things that may have to be discarded for to maintain some kind of semblance of functionality or order. Pretty fascinating, I think. So this is going to be, for me, all kind of bringing in number one, which is aging, and also the rings of Saturn. Okay, hopefully I articulated that well enough that you guys understand what I'm talking about. I'll be happy when Mercury passes over the sun and moves away from the sun, because for me, I've definitely been feeling Mercury in Pisces. That whole depression, exile thing for me has been really good on for my imagination and for certain creative things, but for more trying to come up with explanations or even just remembering things, sometimes I've been more forgetful with this passage of Mercury through Pisces. So hopefully I'm articulating this in a way that makes sense. So sorry if I'm not. But for number two, I have archetypal overlap, messages, gnosis, wisdom, and temperance. And of course, this is just going to be a slightly different angle around the first one. But this is more about how we see the archetypal overlap of all of these planets. We're talking about what are the areas that Mercury will overlap with Saturn? How does Saturn's symbolism overlap with the sun's symbolism, and so on and so forth, right? So messages, Mercury obviously associated with messages, but also thinking, also wisdom, also learning. Saturn is associated with, a lot of people forget this about Saturn because we tend to only think of Saturn as kind of like this malefic guy that's just representing things that we don't like, or suffering, or misfortune, or something like that. But Saturn has always been connected with contemplation and genius. I am trying to remember. I think that Einstein was a Pisces sun, was he not? But regardless, when I think of Saturn in Pisces, for some reason, or Saturn in Aquarius, for some reason, with Saturn in these two placements, I think of Einstein. I think of that contemplative genius that is way outside the normal realm of IQ for most of us, right? He's in another stratosphere all on his own, right? Thinking up light and things like this. But for me, I cannot help but think that one way that we might experience the astrology this week is that there's this kind of like this Einsteinian quality to it. I'm not saying that we're all going to be Einstein for the next week, but when you have the sun there, ancient astrologers said that the sun was connected to the organ of perception, or connected to gnosis, or obviously seeing, right? It's providing that the highest insight or wisdom or gnosis or knowledge or ways in which we perceive. It has this connection with how we perceive something or how we know something. And then Jupiter also in the mix here. This is this triple conjunction happening in Jupiter's sign, and then we get an actual aspect from Jupiter that is coming into the mix here. So you get Jupiter connected with wisdom and temperance and things like that, right? So I get, okay, first of all, this is something like gaining powerful insight, understanding, truth, wisdom, or knowledge in some area, especially about how things are held together or are into the nature of order or hierarchy. Because the sun corresponds with knowing, Mercury with messages and learning, Saturn with experience, genius, and contemplation, and Jupiter with systems of order or with broader wisdom. So for me, there is this whole thing that is like, we're going to take something seriously. We're maybe thinking deeply about something. There's maybe this mystical way that things are coming into the light as the cazimi is happening with all three planets. And I think it's going to have to do with understanding into the nature of the order of things, like on a broad level. So this could be, how is my life held together? What are the important pieces of my life, and how do they all fit together? And maybe there's this way in which we see some broader perspective about how things are moving, how the puzzle pieces are moving in and out of connectivity or usefulness or something like that. But it's like, oh, I really understand my life in this way that it's like the light switch is just coming on. Or maybe it's just about career, or it could be about politics. It could be anything that has an important meaning around it, right? It's the sun, so it's going to be something that's really central to our lives. But oftentimes we understand our lives within the context of something broader, like within our community, within our friends, within our society, within our nation, within the world. So these could be understanding our place in something larger than ourselves. It could be on a spiritual level, of course, like how are we living according to our spirituality or our religion or something along those lines. But it has this real Einsteinian kind of streak of silver running through it that's like, wow, I've never thought of it this way. Or the light has come on and there's a totally different way to think about this, or a totally new way to do this. Maybe I'm going to move forward with something that I'm doing or involved in, and there is this innovation that comes through, or like a breakthrough kind of quality that really helps us get to the next level of development with something that we're working on. So it could be creatively, spiritually, it could be really anything, but basically all of these planets are overlapping in this way that is symbolizing or pointing to insight, understanding, truth, wisdom, knowledge, especially around how things are fitting together in a broader context, looking into the nature of the order of things. Sometimes Mercury Sun cazimis can also be an indicator that we need to speak on behalf of somebody important in our life, or deliver a message, or be empowered. So one angle of this that fits in here is that we might be empowered by our father, or by our boss, or by somebody that's really important to us, to deliver a message, or to communicate about something, or something along those lines. But we may be tasked by the sun to communicate something important, to notify somebody of something. There is also that symbolism that can happen when we get cazimis with Mercury as well. But that will hit with some people and not with others. So take that as you will there. But those are the broad themes that I see for the astrology of this week, for the last week of February here, leading into the first few days